At my husband's funeral, surrounded by hundreds of mourners in their designer black, my son leaned close and whispered, "You're nothing without Dad." I laughed, a sharp, unexpected sound that made him recoil, his face draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost. If he'd known what I was about to do, he would have kept his privileged mouth shut. My name is Eleanor Lawson, and at 65, I stood in Riverside Cemetery watching them lower my husband into the ground. The rain fell in a fine mist, beating on the polished mahogany casket, like tears I couldn't shed. Edward Lawson, real estate mogul, pillar of the community, beloved patriarch, was taking his final bow before an audience of hundreds. I wore the black Valentino dress he'd bought me 20 years ago for our anniversary. Back then, he'd said it made me look like royalty. Now it felt like armor against the scrutinizing eyes of business associates, society friends, and family members who whispered behind gloved hands. They all wondered the same thing. What would happen to the Lawson empire now? My son Mark stood across from me, his jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well. At 35, he was the spitting image of his father, same sharp cheekbones, same cold blue eyes, same air of entitlement that money breeds. His wife Vanessa clung to his arm, her grief as perfectly applied as her makeup. She'd worn diamonds to a funeral. Edward would have found that tasteless. The priest droned on about Edward's accomplishments, his vision, his legacy. I listened to the sanitized version of our life together, this fairy tale they'd constructed where he was the sole architect of our success. My fingers tightened around the rose I held, 40 years of marriage reduced to platitudes and lies. As the crowd began to disperse, Mark finally approached me. He'd avoided me all morning, greeting distant cousins and business partners while treating his own mother like a stranger. The rain had picked up, drumming against our umbrellas in a staccato rhythm. "Mother," he said, the word falling from his lips like an obligation. "Mark." I kept my voice steady, neutral. This wasn't the place for what simmered between us. He glanced around, ensuring we had relative privacy among the headstones and departing mourners. Then he leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, his cologne, the same one Edward wore, filling my nostrils. "You know things are going to change now," he said. "The board will expect leadership, real leadership." His eyes flicked over me dismissively. "You should start thinking about your retirement, maybe that cottage in Maine you always talked about." I almost smiled then. Almost. "Is that so?" I asked. "Father's gone," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "Without him, you're nothing. You were just the woman on his arm at charity galas, the signature on documents he was too busy to sign. You're nothing without Dad." The words hung in the air between us, sharp as the November wind, around us. People huddled under umbrellas, their hushed conversations creating a low murmur. Someone's heel caught in the wet grass. A child whimpered about the cold. And I laughed. It wasn't planned. The sound erupted from somewhere deep inside me, a harsh bark that cut through the funeral atmosphere like a blade. Mark jerked back as if I'd slapped him, his face draining of color until he looked almost gray in the dim light. "Mother?" His voice cracked slightly, the confident executive replaced by something younger, uncertain. I composed myself, smoothing down my dress with one hand. "Thank you for clarifying your position. Mark, it's always helpful to know where one stands." He blinked, confusion replacing shock. "I don't—" "Vanessa is waiting," I said, nodding toward his wife, who was gesturing impatiently from their town car. "You should go. We'll talk soon." I watched him walk away, his shoulders hunched against more than just the rain. He glanced back once, and I gave him my sweetest smile, the one I'd perfected at 1,000 business dinners where men explained my own ideas back to me. If only he knew. If only any of them knew what was coming. The last mourner departed, leaving me alone with the fresh grave and the truth that Edward took with him. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, just like the rain that was already softening the carefully placed earth. I dropped my rose onto the casket and turned away. It was time to show them all exactly who was nothing. The memories came flooding back that night as I sat in Edward's study, surrounded by the ghosts of our past. I poured myself a glass of his 30-year-old scotch, the bottle he'd been saving for a special occasion that would never come. It was 1984 when we started Lawson Realty Group in our cramped one-bedroom apartment on the Lower East Side. Edward had the charm and the connections from his prep school days. I had the law degree I'd earned working nights while raising baby Mark. The division of labor seemed natural then. He'd wine and dine clients while I pored over contracts until 3 a.m, scrutinizing every clause, every liability. I remembered the first big deal, the Riverside Commercial Complex. Edward had promised the investors a detailed prospectus by Monday. He spent the weekend golfing with potential partners while I built the entire financial model, analyzed market comparables, and drafted 40 pages of projections. When he presented it, charming the room with his easy smile and firm handshake, everyone applauded his business acumen. I sat in the corner, taking notes, invisible. "You're so lucky," the other wives would tell me at company parties. "Edward is brilliant." I'd smile and nod, playing my part while my mind calculated cap rates and negotiated term sheets they couldn't imagine I understood. The real turning point came in 1992. We were bidding on the Harborfront development, a $100 million project that would either make us or destroy us. The night before the presentation, Edward came home reeking of perfume that wasn't mine, Cynthia from the Morgan Stanley deal. I'd suspected. "Late meeting," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. I spent that night not crying or raging, but refining our proposal. I identified a zoning loophole that would save the client $12 million in development costs. When Edward presented it the next morning, my work, my insight, my sleepless night, they gave us the project on the spot. That became our pattern. His affairs were as predictable as quarterly earnings reports. The secretary, the client's daughter, the interior designer. Each time, I'd discover lipstick stains or hotel receipts, and each time, I'd swallow my pride and channel my fury into the work. Every betrayal became another deal closed, another property acquired, another million in our portfolio. Mark never saw that side of his father. To him, Edward was a god who built an empire from nothing. When Mark was 16, I'd suggested he intern at the company, shadow the legal department, learn the actual mechanics of the business. Why would he waste time with paperwork? Edward had laughed. "That's what we pay people like you to handle." People like me, his own wife, reduced to hired help in front of our son. So Mark grew up believing the myth. He watched his father's TED Talks about vision and leadership. He attended the charity galas where Edward received Lifetime Achievement Awards for buildings I'd negotiated, developments I'd structured, deals I'd saved from collapse. The boy worshipped a facade while dismissing the architect behind it. I pulled out a manila folder from Edward's desk, my insurance policy, hidden in plain sight among his golf scorecards and yacht club directories. Inside were the original incorporation documents for Lawson Realty Group. My signature came first. I was the founding partner, not Edward. There were handwritten notes from major deals, strategy sessions in my careful script, email threads where clients thanked me directly before Edward swooped in to claim credit. But the most damning evidence was the notebook I'd kept for 40 years. Every major decision, every crucial negotiation, every saved disaster, documented in my hand, names, dates, numbers, the real history of Lawson Realty Group, not the varnished version Edward sold to the world. I'd never planned to use it. I'd convinced myself that maintaining the family image, protecting Mark's inheritance, was worth the invisibility. But standing in that cemetery, hearing my own son dismiss me as nothing, something fundamental shifted. The scotch burned my throat, a pleasant fire that matched my resolve. Tomorrow, the lawyers would read Edward's will. Mark was already planning his succession, probably practicing his inaugural speech to the board. Vanessa was likely online shopping for new office furniture. They had no idea what was coming. Edward might have been many things: unfaithful, narcissistic, credit stealing, but he wasn't stupid. He knew who really built this company. And in his final act, perhaps out of guilt or mere pragmatism, he'd done something that would shatter Mark's carefully constructed world. I raised my glass to Edward's portrait above the fireplace. "You always did like a good surprise," I said to the oil-painted eyes that would never wink at another secretary again. Tomorrow, I would stop being nothing. Tomorrow, I would become everything they never thought I could be. The law offices of Drake & Associates occupied the top floor of a building Edward and I had developed 15 years ago. I arrived at 10 sharp, my heels clicking against marble floors I'd personally selected from a quarry in Carrara. Marilyn Drake rose to greet me, her silver hair gleaming under the conference room lights. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, though her eyes held something else, anticipation, perhaps even satisfaction. She'd been our attorney for 30 years. She knew where all the bodies were buried. "Thank you. Marilyn, shall we proceed?" Mark was already there, of course, seated at the head of the table as if he owned the place. Vanessa perched beside him, her fingers dancing over her phone screen. 2 board members flanked them, Richard Stein and Patricia Winters, both eager to cement their positions in the new regime. "Mother," Mark acknowledged curtly, "we were just discussing the transition timeline." "How efficient of you," I said, taking a seat across from him, "planning the future before we've settled the past." Marilyn cleared her throat. "If everyone's ready, I'll begin with Edward's personal effects and minor bequests." The usual items flowed past: the yacht to the club, artwork to museums, generous donations to his alma mater. Mark drummed his fingers impatiently through each item, waiting for the only thing that mattered. "Now," Marilyn continued, "regarding the Lawson Realty Group and associated holdings." Mark straightened, already wearing the expression of a king accepting his crown. "Edward was very specific in his instructions," Marilyn said, pulling out a sealed envelope. "He asked that this letter be read aloud before announcing the distribution of corporate assets." She broke the seal and began to read in Edward's voice, somehow capturing his measured cadence. "To those assembled here, especially my son Mark, I write this with full clarity of mind and purpose. For 40 years, I have been the face of Lawson Realty Group. I have accepted praise, accolades, and credit for building this empire. But legacies built on lies crumble eventually, and I won't leave this world perpetuating a fraud." Mark's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. Vanessa looked up from her phone. "The truth is simple. I was a salesman. Nothing more. Every strategic decision, every crucial negotiation, every innovation that built this company came from one person, my wife, Eleanor. While I played golf and attended lunches, she worked 18-hour days. While I collected awards, she saved us from bankruptcy 3 times. While I had affairs that she gracefully ignored, she turned her pain into profit margins." The room had gone completely still. Richard Stein's mouth hung slightly open. "I leave the entirety of Lawson Realty Group, all associated properties, and my personal assets to Eleanor Lawson, with one provision: Mark may earn a position in the company by starting at entry level and working his way up through merit alone. If he refuses, he receives nothing. If he succeeds, he'll learn what his mother always knew, that respect is earned, not inherited." Marilyn set down the letter and pulled out another document. "The will itself mirrors these sentiments. Mrs. Lawson, you are now the sole owner and CEO of Lawson Realty Group." This is insane!" Mark shot to his feet, his face flushed. He wasn't in his right mind. The cancer, the medications. "I have 3 psychiatric evaluations confirming Edward's mental competence," Marilyn interrupted smoothly. "He anticipated your reaction. You manipulated him." Mark turned on me, his voice rising. "You waited until he was weak, dying." "Sit down, Mark." My voice cut through his tirade like ice. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself? You've stolen my inheritance." "Stolen?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me show you something." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. The Waterfront Plaza deal, 2005. You were in college, remember? Your father almost lost everything betting on subprime mortgages. I spent 3 weeks restructuring the debt, negotiating with 20 different banks. Look at the signatures. Mark grabbed the papers, his eyes scanning frantically. The Singapore expansion, 2010, I continued, producing another file. Your father was in rehab for his drinking. I flew to Asia 14 times in 6 months, built relationships, closed deals, alone. The Phoenix development that saved us after the housing crash, the tax restructuring that kept us from bankruptcy, the merger with Hartman Properties, every major decision for 40 years. I stacked document after document on the table. All me, all invisible. All credited to a man who couldn't read a balance sheet without help. These are just papers, Mark said desperately. Anyone could have... Page 47, I said calmly. Your father's handwriting. Eleanor figured out the solution. Brilliant as always. I'll present it tomorrow. The room watched Mark crumble in real time, his certainty dissolving as he recognized his father's distinctive scrawl. I never lied to you, I said quietly. I let you believe what you wanted to believe, what was easier to believe. That's on you. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice sharp. This is illegal. We'll contest. With what money? I asked. The credit cards in your wallet are corporate accounts. The house you live in is company property. The car you drove here is leased through Lawson Realty. Everything you have exists at my discretion. I stood, gathering my composure like armor. Mark, you have a choice. Report to our Phoenix office Monday morning as a junior project manager. Learn the business from the ground up. Earn your place, or walk away with nothing but the knowledge that you were exactly right at the funeral, without your father's name. You really are nothing. 3 days after the will reading, I summoned Mark to my office, Edward's former office, now thoroughly mine. I'd replaced his golf trophies with my architecture books, his vanity photos with the original blueprints of our first building. The room finally reflected the truth of who built this empire. Mark entered at precisely 2 o'clock, his usual swagger replaced by something brittle and uncertain. The past 72 hours had aged him. His tie was crooked, his hair uncombed, small cracks in the perfect facade he'd always maintained. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. The power dynamic was clear, intentional. He was a supplicant now, not an heir apparent. Mother. Mrs. Lawson, I corrected. In this office, I'm your potential employer, not your mother. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Mrs. Lawson, I've considered your offer. And? It's degrading. I have an MBA from Wharton. I've been preparing to run this company my entire life. Starting as a junior project manager is appropriate, I finished. Your MBA taught you theory. Your preparation consisted of watching your father take credit for my work. You know nothing about the actual mechanics of this business. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. This is the Bayside Towers project. Tell me what you see. Mark opened it, scanning the documents with growing confusion. It's a proposal for a mixed-use development. What's the projected ROI? I'd need to analyze 15.3% over 5 years. What's the biggest risk factor? He flipped through pages desperately. The market conditions. Soil contamination from the old factory site. Remediation could add $12 million to costs. It's in the environmental report you skipped. I leaned back. You've been playing CEO in your mind for so long. You never learned how to read the details that make or break deals. This is ridiculous, Mark snapped, his composure finally cracking. You're doing this to humiliate me. I'm doing this to save you from yourself, I said quietly. And maybe, if you're capable of learning, to save this company from what you would have done to it. What's that supposed to mean? I opened another drawer, producing a thick report. This is the analysis I commissioned on your vision for Lawson Realty, the The presentation you gave to board members at the country club last month. You thought I didn't know about that? Mark's face flushed. He'd been secretly courting board support, preparing for his takeover. Leveraging our entire portfolio for a crypto-backed real estate platform? Abandoning our core markets for speculative tech ventures? Your plan would have destroyed 40 years of careful building in 18 months. The market is evolving. The market is eternal. Buildings, land, solid assets, these endure. Everything else is gambling disguised as innovation. I closed the report with finality. Your father understood that much, at least. Mark stood abruptly. I won't do it. I won't crawl on my belly for scraps from my own family's table. Then leave, I said simply. Sign these severance papers. Take the $10,000 I'm legally required to give you, your father's gesture toward fairness, and go. 10,000? His voice cracked. That won't even cover Vanessa's monthly shopping. Then I suggest you both learn to budget. He turned toward the door, then stopped. She'll leave me. You know that, right? Vanessa won't stay without the money, the status. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a flicker of sympathy. If she leaves because the money's gone, then you'll have learned something valuable about the difference between acquisition and worth. Don't pretend this is some lesson, he snarled. This is revenge, pure and simple. Yes, I admitted, it is. You stood at your father's grave and told me I was nothing. You dismissed 40 years of my life as decoration. So yes, Mark, this is revenge, but it's also an opportunity. The question is whether you're smart enough to see it. He stood frozen in the doorway, his hand on the handle. Your father never gave you the chance to earn anything, I continued. Everything was handed to you, the cars, the education, the position. You never got to discover if you were actually capable of building something yourself. I'm giving you that chance now. By destroying my life? By forcing you to build a real one. Monday morning, 7 a.m. Phoenix office. Greg Sanders will be your supervisor. He started in the mailroom 20 years ago. Now he runs our entire Southwest division. He'll teach you, if you're willing to learn. Mark turned back, his face a war of emotions. And if I prove myself, if I work my way up, then you'll earn what you always assumed was yours by birthright. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I laughed at your funeral pronouncement. He left without another word, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like finality. I sat alone in the office I'd earned but never claimed, surrounded by the evidence of a life's work finally acknowledged. The phone rang. Vanessa's number, I let it go to voicemail. Already knowing what she'd say, the begging would come first, then threats, then the inevitable departure when she realized the gold mine had run dry. I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out at the city skyline. Buildings I'd helped create, a legacy I'd built in shadow. Monday would tell me whether my son was salvageable or whether he was truly his father's son. All surface and no substance. Either way, I'd already won. I was no longer nothing. I was everything I'd always been, just finally visible. The call came at 11:45 on Saturday night. I was reviewing contracts in my study, a glass of wine at my elbow. When my phone lit up with Mark's number, I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mother. His voice was rough, either from alcohol or emotion. I need to talk to you. It's late, Mark. Vanessa's gone. The words came out in a rush. She packed her bags this afternoon, maxed out the credit cards, buying designer luggage to pack her things in. The irony isn't lost on me. I said nothing, waiting. She actually laughed when I told her about the Phoenix job, said she didn't marry a middle manager, said she'd rather be a trophy wife to someone who could afford to polish her. I'm sorry, I said, and found that I meant it. Not for the loss of Vanessa, that was a blessing disguised as abandonment, but for the pain in my son's voice. Are you, or is this exactly what you wanted? What I wanted was for you to see people clearly, including yourself. Vanessa just accelerated the process. I heard ice clinking in a glass on his end. She told me something before she left, said she only married me because she thought I'd inherit everything. that she'd been counting down the days until Dad died. And how does that make you feel? A bitter laugh, like I'm my father's son. He collected beautiful things without caring what was underneath. I did the same. It was the first moment of real insight I'd heard from him in years. It's not too late to change that pattern. Isn't it? I'm 35 years old, getting divorced, about to start at the bottom of a company I thought I owned. I've lost everything. You've lost nothing that mattered, I corrected, and you still have the opportunity to gain something real. The Phoenix job. The Phoenix job. Greg Sanders is expecting you Monday morning. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, wrestling with his pride. I went to the office today, he finally said. Our office. Your office. I used my key. It still worked. I deliberately not changed the locks yet, curious to see what he'd do. I found the files you showed me, really looked at them this time. Every detail. His voice dropped. How did I not see it? All those years, how did I not notice that you were the one making everything work? Because you weren't looking. Children see what they expect to see, and Edward was very good at managing expectations. I found other things, too. Contracts with your corrections in red ink, emails where clients specifically asked for your input, that lawsuit in 2008, you're the one who found the loophole that saved us. Yes. Dad never mentioned it. He took credit for that in his autobiography. I smiled grimly. Your father's autobiography was more fiction than fact. You know that now. I also found the Phoenix file. The real one, not the summary. The contamination issue. It's worse than you told me, isn't it? I sat up straighter. What makes you say that? The environmental report mentions possible groundwater involvement if it's spread beyond the initial site. We're looking at federal EPA involvement, decades of cleanup, maybe $100 million in liability. My pulse quickened. He'd actually read the report, understood the implications. Go on. But there's a mitigation strategy in the appendix. Partnering with the university's environmental science program, turning the cleanup into a research project. Tax breaks, good PR, shared costs. It's brilliant. Thank you. You wrote that, didn't you? Of course you did. He paused. Is this why you're sending me to Phoenix? To handle this? I'm sending you to Phoenix to learn. What you do with that learning is up to you. Greg Sanders, he knows about the contamination? Greg knows everything he needs to know. Whether he shares that with you will depend on whether you earn his trust. Another long silence, then, I've been an ass. Yes. A complete, arrogant, blind ass. Yes. You're enjoying this. Perhaps a little. I'm 65 years old. Mark, I've earned the right to some satisfaction. He actually chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. Fair enough. Mother, Mrs. Lawson, what if I fail? What if I'm not capable of doing the actual work? Then you'll have learned something valuable about yourself. But I don't think you'll fail. Why not? Because you're my son too, not just Edward's, and tonight, for the first time in years, you're starting to sound like it. I'll be there Monday, 7 a.m. 6:30, I corrected. Greg likes people who arrive early. 6:30, then, he hesitated. Thank you for the chance. Even if it comes wrapped in humiliation. The humiliation is temporary. The education is permanent. After he hung up, I sat in the quiet of my study, contemplating the unexpected turn of the evening. Vanessa's departure had done more in one afternoon than years of subtle hints and careful suggestions. Sometimes, apparently, people needed their worlds to collapse before they could see what had always been there. I pulled up the Phoenix files on my computer, adding a note for Greg Sanders. Mark would be arriving Monday, raw and humbled, but possibly ready to learn. The real test would come when he faced that contamination crisis, whether he'd panic, pass the buck, or prove he'd inherited more than just his father's jawline. My phone buzzed, a text from Vanessa. Good luck with your son. You'll need it. I deleted it without responding. She was already part of the past, a footnote in a story that was finally being written correctly. Monday would begin the next chapter, one where Mark would either rise to meet his potential or confirm that some apples fall too far from the tree to be salvaged. Either way, I'd given him something his father never had, the chance to earn his place in the world. The first report from Phoenix arrived 2 weeks later. Greg Sanders had a gift for concise brutality. Mark showed up at 6:15. Points for effort, wore a $3,000 suit to a construction site, lost those points immediately, spent the first day shadowing the site foreman, threw up when we hit the sewage pipe, came back the next morning in jeans. I smiled, picturing my son, who'd never worn anything off the rack in his life, shopping for work clothes at some Phoenix department store. The weekly reports became my guilty pleasure. Week 3. Finally stopped referring to himself as the owner's son. The crew still calls him Suit, but now it's almost affectionate. Week 5, caught a calculation error in the structural plans, saved us from a 60-day delay, still can't operate a nail gun without flinching. Week 7, mediated a dispute between the electrical and plumbing contractors, used words like synergy. They laughed at him. Then he crawled into the service tunnel himself to prove the electrician's plan would work. They stopped laughing. But it was the Week 9 report that made me set down my coffee. Environmental Protection Agencies showed up unannounced. Contamination worse than estimated. Federal investigation imminent. Mark requested emergency meeting with full documentation. Kid might surprise us both. My phone rang an hour later. Mark sounded exhausted but oddly energized. "I need your help," he said without preamble, not as my mother, as someone who understands how to navigate a crisis. "I'm listening." The EPA found benzene in the groundwater. It's migrated off-site. 3 residential wells show trace amounts. We're looking at criminal negligence charges if we can't prove due diligence. "What's your plan?" "That's why I'm calling. I have ideas, but I need to know if I'm thinking like a Lawson or just panicking like an amateur." I pulled up the Phoenix files on my screen. Walk me through it. First, full transparency. We self-report everything we've found, even the data that makes us look worse. Build trust with the EPA from day one. Good, continue. Second, immediate remediation. Not the cheapest option, the best option. Partner with the university program you mentioned in the appendix. Turn this into a showcase for environmental responsibility. Expensive, I noted. But less expensive than a federal lawsuit and permanent reputation damage. I've run the numbers. We can absorb the cost if we restructure 2 other projects. Which ones? The Scottsdale luxury condos and the Tempe office park. Delay Scottsdale by 6 months. Accelerate Tempe to capture the tax incentives. The cash flow works. I found myself nodding. What else? Community engagement, town halls, health screenings for affected residents, transparent progress reports. We made this mess, even if it predates our ownership, so we own the cleanup. And internally? I need authority to make decisions quickly. Greg's great, but he has to run everything through corporate. By the time approvals come back, the EPA will have already decided we're stonewalling. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, not asking for power as birthright, but requesting authority to handle responsibility. You'll have a letter of authorization by morning, spending authority up to $10 million without additional approval. Don't make me regret it. I won't. He paused. There's one more thing. The original contamination. I traced it back. Dad knew about it when he bought the property in '98. There's a survey in the files that mentions potential environmental concerns. He buried it. My stomach tightened. You're certain? His handwriting is on the margin. Acceptable risk for the price. He knew, and he bought it anyway. Another piece of Edward's legacy crumbling. What do you want to do with this information? Nothing. He's dead. Lawson Realty isn't, we fix the problem and move forward, but I thought you should know. Thank you for telling me. Eleanor, Mom, can I ask you something? The shift from business to personal was jarring. Go ahead. How many other fires did you put out over the years? How many disasters did you prevent that he never even knew about? More than I can count. And you never said anything, never demanded credit. I was building something more important than my ego. I was building security for our family. Recognition would have been nice, but stability mattered more. I would have demanded a parade after the first save. Yes, I agreed. You would have a month ago, anyway. And now? Now you're covered in phoenix dust, dealing with benzene contamination and calling me for strategic advice instead of demanding I fix it for you. Draw your own conclusions. He laughed, a rueful sound. Greg says I might make a decent project manager in 5 years if I stop flinching at the nail gun. Greg's an optimist. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Mark, I said seriously, you're doing well. Better than I expected. Don't let it go to your head. Hard to get a big head when you're knee-deep in contaminated soil samples. I've got to go. EPA wants another site walk at 3. Handle it well. The whole company is watching Phoenix now. No pressure, right? After he hung up, I stared at the reports scattered across my desk. 9 weeks ago. He'd sneered at me across a grave. Now he was voluntarily wading through the mess his father had left behind, learning the unglamorous reality of building and maintaining an empire. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but for the first time since I'd laughed at his funeral pronouncement, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not for reconciliation or some Hollywood ending where we embraced with tears and apologies. Just hope that my son might become someone worth knowing. I drafted the authorization letter, giving him the power to save or sink a $10 million project. Then I poured another coffee and got back to work. Phoenix was just one fire. I had an entire company to run, decades of shadows to step out of, and a legacy to build in my own name. But first, I'd watch my son learn to use a nail gun without flinching. Some victories were worth savoring. 6 months later, I convened an emergency board meeting. The Phoenix crisis had exploded beyond our worst projections. Benzene levels in neighboring properties had triggered a federal investigation, and we faced potential fines that could cripple the company. Every board member sat rigid in their seats, fear palpable in the air. The EPA has given us 72 hours to present a comprehensive remediation plan, I announced. Failure to comply means criminal charges and immediate asset freeze. Richard Stein shifted nervously. We should consider bankruptcy protection, shield the other properties. And destroy 40 years of reputation overnight, Patricia Winters interrupted. Our investors would flee. What investors? Richard shot back. Once this hits the Wall Street Journal, we're finished anyway. I let them argue, watching the panic spread. These were Edwards' people, good at celebrating success, useless in crisis. They'd never had to fight for survival because I'd always done it for them, invisibly. There is another option, I said quietly. The room stilled. Mark has been managing the Phoenix situation on the ground. He's requested permission to present his solution directly to the board. Mark? Richard's eyebrows shot up. The boy who wanted to turn us into a crypto company? The man who spent 6 months in the trenches understanding our actual business, I corrected. He's earned the right to be heard. I nodded to my assistant, who opened the conference room doors. Mark entered, and I barely recognized him. Gone was the soft executive wannabe. 6 months of Phoenix sun and physical labor had hardened him. His suit, off the rack but well chosen, fit differently on shoulders that had learned to carry more than just entitlement. He set up his presentation without flourish, no trace of his old need to command the room through charm. Instead, he let competence speak. Board members, he began, pulling up a complex spreadsheet. The contamination extends to 14 residential properties. Traditional remediation would cost $90 million and take 8 years. We don't have either. So we're finished, Richard muttered. No, Mark said firmly. We pivot. Instead of fighting the contamination, we transform it into opportunity. He clicked to the next slide, architectural renderings of a transformed Phoenix site. Environmental Innovation Center, partnership between Lawson Realty, Arizona State University, and 3 biotech startups specializing in groundwater remediation. We donate the contaminated land for research, maintaining ownership of the clean parcels surrounding it. The university gets a world-class facility. The startups get real-world testing grounds. We get massive tax incentives and positive PR that transforms us from villains to visionaries. The liability, Patricia started, shared 3 ways. Plus, the federal government has grants for exactly this kind of public-private environmental partnership. I've had preliminary discussions with the Department of Energy. They're interested. He pulled up financial projections. Initial cost, $35 million. Projected return through tax incentives and eventual land development, $120 million over 10 years. Plus, we establish Lawson Realty as the leader in sustainable development. You've had discussions with the federal government? Richard asked, incredulous. Who authorized? I did, I interjected. Mark identified the opportunity and acted. That's what leaders do. Mark continued for another 20 minutes, answering every question with detailed responses. He knew the soil reports, the legal precedents, the contact names at every agency. When Patricia tried to trip him up on zoning regulations, he quoted the relevant statutes from memory. But it was his response to Richard's sneering question that silenced the room. Why should we trust you with this? 6 months ago, you didn't even know what benzene was. Mark nodded. You're right. 6 months ago, I was an idiot with an MBA who thought leadership meant giving orders. I know better now. Leadership means standing in a contaminated field at 5 a.m, explaining to a family why their well water isn't safe. It means getting screamed at by regulators, contractors, and residents, then finding solutions anyway. It means admitting you don't know everything and learning from people who do. He looked directly at me. My mother tried to teach me that for years. I was too arrogant to listen. The Phoenix crisis forced me to learn what she's always known, that real power comes from solving real problems, not from last names or corner offices. The room was silent. I kept my expression neutral, though something in my chest tightened. I'm not asking you to trust me, Mark concluded. I'm asking you to look at the data, evaluate the plan, and decide if it's our best option for survival. The work speaks for itself. After he left, the debate was brief. The plan was solid. The alternative was bankruptcy. And, though no one said it aloud, Mark had shown more leadership in that presentation than Edward had in his final years. All in favor, I called. Unanimous approval. Later, I found Mark in the hallway, leaning against a window overlooking the city. The afternoon light caught the premature gray in his hair. Phoenix had aged him, but in necessary ways. Well played, I said. He turned, surprised. I thought you'd left. I wanted to congratulate you privately. The presentation was excellent. Greg helped, and the team in Phoenix? I just compiled their ideas. No, I said firmly. You led. There's a difference between taking credit for others' work and synthesizing a team's efforts into vision. You did the latter. He studied me for a long moment. At Dad's funeral, I said you were nothing without him. I remember. I need to tell you something about that day. Right before I said those words, Richard Stein pulled me aside. He said the board was worried about the company's future with just Eleanor in charge. He said they needed strong male leadership. He said, Mark's jaw tightened. He said Dad had always handled the real business while you played secretary. My eyes narrowed. Richard said that? I believed him. Wanted to believe him. It fit the story I told myself. He met my gaze. I was wrong about everything, and I'm sorry. I considered my son, battle-tested now, humbled by experience, finally seeing clearly. Apology accepted. I said simply, now get back to Phoenix. You have an environmental center to build. Actually, he said, pulling out an envelope, I have something else for you first. Inside was a single photo, Mark and his team at the contaminated site, all wearing protective gear, all covered in dirt, all grinning despite the crisis they faced. At the bottom, someone had written, Lawson Realty Phoenix team, turning disaster into opportunity. Greg thought you'd want this, Mark explained. said you'd understand why. I did understand. It was visual proof of what I'd always known but never seen. A Lawson willing to get dirty to build something clean. "Thank you," I said, meaning more than just the photo. He nodded and headed for the elevator. Just before the doors closed, he called out, "Hey, Mom, you're not nothing, you're everything, you always have been." The doors shut before I could respond, leaving me alone with a photo of my son finally becoming himself, and the echo of words that transformed a funeral insult into something resembling redemption. The Phoenix Environmental Innovation Center opened 2 years after Edward's funeral. Governors, senators, and industry leaders gathered for the ribbon cutting, all eager to associate themselves with what Time magazine had called the most innovative environmental recovery project in American history. Mark stood at the podium, confident but not cocky, wearing a hard hat along with his suit, a man who understood both boardrooms and building sites now. He thanked the team, the partners, the university, then he paused, finding me in the crowd. But most of all, I need to thank Eleanor Lawson, CEO of Lawson Realty Group, and my mother. 2 years ago, she could have let this company coast on past success. Instead, she chose transformation. She took a crisis that could have destroyed us and turned it into our greatest triumph. She saw potential where others saw only problems, not just in contaminated land, but in people too. The applause was warm, genuine. I nodded acknowledgement but didn't stand. This was his moment, earned through sweat and humility. After the ceremony, I found myself alone in my office, still Edward's office in everyone's mind but mine. The city sparkled below, buildings and developments I'd shaped from behind the scenes for decades. On my desk sat 3 things: the Phoenix team photo Mark had given me, my original notebook documenting 40 years of invisible work, and a letter from Vanessa that had arrived that morning. I opened her letter, curious despite myself. "Eleanor, I heard about Phoenix. Congratulations. Mark sent me the divorce papers. I signed them. I'm marrying a tech executive from Seattle. He thinks I'm decorative, and I'm fine with that. Some women are built for boardrooms. Some of us are built for ball gowns. But I wanted you to know, I see now what you did. The lesson, Mark needed to lose everything to find himself. I would have held him back. You knew that. You're ruthless in the kindest way. Take care of him. Vanessa." I smiled, filing the letter away. Even Vanessa had learned something from all this. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Mark entered, still wearing his hard hat. "Hell of a speech," I said. I meant every word. He sat across from me, in the same chair where he'd once demanded his birthright. "The board meeting is next week." "I'm aware." "They're going to vote on the succession plan. Word is they want me as president reporting to you as CEO and chairman. And I wanted to talk to you first. Make sure it's what you want." I leaned back, studying him. "What do you think I want?" 2 years ago, I'd have said revenge, complete control, to punish me indefinitely. He met my gaze. "Now, I think you want what you've always wanted, for Lawson Realty to thrive, for our family legacy to mean something real." "Then you have your answer." He stood to leave, then turned back. "Mom, that day at the funeral, when I said you were nothing without Dad, why did you laugh?" I considered the question, remembering that moment in the rain, the words that had sparked everything that followed. "Because," I said finally, "I realized you'd just given me permission to stop pretending. For 40 years, I'd played a role, the supportive wife, the invisible partner. Your insult freed me. If I was already nothing in your eyes, then I had nothing left to lose by becoming everything I'd always been, Anit. So my cruelty was the catalyst I needed. Sometimes the worst things people say to us become the keys to our liberation." Mark absorbed this, then asked quietly, "Do you forgive me?" "Forgiveness isn't the right word. You were a product of your environment, shaped by your father's ego and my silence. We all played our parts." I picked up the Phoenix photo, but look at you now. You've earned your place through merit, not name. You've learned that leadership is service, not privilege. The man you've become, that's worth more than any apology. He nodded, emotion flickering across his weathered face. I should get back to Phoenix. We're breaking ground on Phase 2 tomorrow. Mark, I called as he reached the door. The board meeting next week. You have my support. President of Lawson Realty. Earned, not inherited. Thank you. He paused. For everything, the lesson, the chance, the kick in the ass I desperately needed. You're welcome. After he left, I sat alone in the gathering dusk. From my window, I could see the Lawson Building sign illuminated against the darkening sky. For 40 years, that name had represented Edward's public triumph and my private labor. Now it meant something different, a legacy rebuilt on truth, a son redeemed through struggle, an empire that would outlast us all because it was finally built on solid ground. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast to the city below, to Edward, who despite his flaws had given me the stage for this final act, to Mark, who'd proven that even the most entitled can learn humility, and to myself, for playing the long game, for choosing the perfect moment to stop being nothing and start being everything. The office was quiet except for the hum of the city below. I smiled, remembering Mark's words at the funeral, "You're nothing without Dad." He'd been wrong. Of course, I'd never been nothing. I'd been the foundation holding everything up, invisible but essential. His insult had simply given me permission to step into the light and claim what had always been mine. And that was worth more than any revenge I could have planned. The story ends here, in this moment of quiet triumph, not with tears or embraces, but with a woman finally visible, a son finally worthy, and an empire finally honest about who built it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's transformation, forcing those who dismissed you to see clearly, to grow, to earn what they assumed was free. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that revenge becomes something better, redemption. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this tale of family, power, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? I can't wait to hear your perspectives.